It is the voice of Indiana County, WCCS AM 1160 and 101.1 FM. Our conversation with Danny Tarkanian is brought to you by Marcus and Mack, a law firm representing injured people. And he is an attorney, as a matter of fact. He's Danny Tarkanian, the author of the book Rebel with the Cause, the true story of Jerry Tarkanian, who is your dad. Danny, good morning.
Good morning. Thank you for having me on.
It is our pleasure. And in fact, I remember, I might be one of the few who remember you as a player for UNLV many years ago. How about that?
Well, you're aging yourself. You don't want to say that publicly.
Well, I just did, by golly, and I enjoyed watching you as a player. You played with some really, really good basketball players, didn't you?
Well, I had some pretty good ones. There was two really good ones. One great one, Sidney Green was the fifth player taken in the draft for the Chicago Bulls. Larry Anderson was really good too, but he never made it in the pros. Sid was the only one that made it to pros. But we built our team around a lot of role players, and then we got the ball to Sid and Larry, and they really had great years for us.
Well, the architect of that team and of all of those great teams down through the years is your dad, Jerry Tarkanian, who sadly is no longer with us. And what a book you have written. You know, most people want to start by talking about the NCAA and all of those things that happened. I want to start by talking about your mom. Your mom and your
Good.
Dad, they not only had a great love story, but she was an integral part of what he did as a coach, too, wasn't she?
She sure was. And my dad had said over and over again, she's the toughest competitor he's ever met, the toughest person he's ever met. There's a number of reasons why she's a big part of his success. First and foremost was she was really big in helping the players. My dad started coaching in the 60s, and back then the rule was coaches could not get close to the players. If they did, they wouldn't be able to motivate them. Well, my dad had a mentor who was a football coach who thought otherwise, and my dad bought into that philosophy. So he tried to get real close with his players. He brought in a lot of players that had problems off the court and in the classroom, just like he did growing up. But they got very close with him and tried to help him a lot, and my mother was a big part of that. With players would come over our house, she would help tutor them, she would cook for them. If they had problems, she would try to help them along with my father. And then as it went on, first of all, she was the biggest fan. And as I put in the book, there are some hilarious stories of her going after officials and just yelling and screaming. It's really, my mom was something else as a supporter of my dad at the games. But then the biggest thing, maybe, for my mother was my dad didn't want to continue the fight with the NC2A. He wanted to give up the lawsuit he had, and my mother wouldn't let him. It was costing a lot of money. And because she wouldn't let him, the NC2A ended up having to pay him $2.5 million. And that was all my mother.
Yeah, well, the story of their courtship and their early life together, that's worth the price of the book, first of all. But then the book itself, The Rebel with a Cause, you mentioned your dad and the closeness he developed with his basketball players down through the years. That's as big a part of the story as anything. I don't know, in terms of other coaches of other basketball teams, that there have been others that are as close with their players as Jerry was with so many of his guys. But he really built a family atmosphere. And I love the descriptions you give in the book of him at practices. He would not let up. He ran a different practice than anybody else, didn't he?
You just hit the two biggest things I was trying to get across in the book, and I'm so glad that you got that out of the book, because that was my intent. First of all, with respect to his relationship with the players, when he first started, no other coaches were doing that, no one of any big name at least. Now there's other coaches that have followed what my dad did, and they're trying to get close with them and have that type of relationship. My dad always went the extra step. My favorite story is one when John Q. Trapp, who was John had been in prison before. He had been kicked out of 2 or 3 different schools before. He comes to Riverside City College and meets with my dad for the first time. And my dad says, "John, if you do what you're supposed to do, you got a chance to have a really good professional career. But if you screw up, you're going to be out of here. You won't have another chance. And by the way, my wife and I are going to dinner. We babysit our 3 kids, the oldest being 7. John was floored. He said, no white person trusted him before, let alone with his kids. And John ended up being a regular babysitter, and he ended up playing for the Clippers in the NBA and had a great career.
That's amazing. That's amazing. Now, take me onto the practice floor, because you experienced it as a player. Yeah. Your dad, your team's practices, they were different than any other practices for any other team.
And then, Yeah, and what we did was, my dad's philosophy was, if he could get close to the players, and he was loyal to the players because he always felt that you had to be loyal to them, that they were going to be loyal back, that he could then get the most out of them in practice. So we talked about the relationship he had. So then when the players got to practice, it was very demanding. We'd have 3-hour practices, 2 hours would be all on defense. It was all hard work and very technique-oriented. And what made my father so much different from the other coaches at that time, and again now coaches have followed my father's lead, is back then coaches used to yell, intimidate, and actually bully the players. Bobby Knight was very successful doing that. My dad did it another way. He tried to motivate them with sarcasm and wit. And I wrote in the book one of the stories I played. We wouldn't practice them hard. So he pulled the team together in a circle, and he said, "You guys are all a bunch of bandits. Next time you pick up your scholarship check, wear a mask and gun because you're robbing the university." And we're sitting there, we're scared to death by the way he said it, but you want to laugh because it's so darn funny. But we went out and played hard, really, really hard.
We have a great image of your dad, and you look at the cover picture for your book, Rebel with a Cause, and there he is, sucking on that towel. You tell the story of how it is that came to be what he did in a basketball game, and it's hilarious, and it's something that carried all the way through. And I'll tell people, just get the book to read it, and then you'll find out why Jerry Tarkanian always had that towel. But we do have to get to the NCAA and the battles with the NCAA, and why it was that he had to fight for his entire coaching career, it seems, to remain on the bench and to keep his teams playing. And it really is an amazing story of perseverance on his part. But really, he wrote an article pretty early on in his tenure that sort of set the NCAA after him. They didn't like that article he wrote, did they?
Yeah, but that was just part of it. To understand how this whole thing generated, you got to understand a little bit about the NCAA and their dictatorial tactics. In the 1950s, the NCAA started an enforcement program, and they passed regulations that applied to the players that were playing back then. Those players were from affluent families that had discretionary income. Well, from the 60s on, basketball and football have been dominated by the poor inner-city African-American kids that don't have any money, any discretionary income. In fact, the homes that they were living in, their parents couldn't even afford those, and they certainly wouldn't give them the money to the kids when they went to college. So I talked about some of the rules that in the book that just couldn't apply to those kids. For example, we recruit a kid out of New York, Fort Apache in the Bronx, one of the worst neighborhoods around. His name was Richie Adams. That he signs with UNLV. How does he get to school? Their family has no money. He lives with his grandmother in a high-rise tenement. Somebody has to pay for it. It's a violation of the institute rules, and my dad felt that was completely wrong. Then when they get to college, you can't give the kids any money to go out on a date, to buy new clothes, to do their laundry, to buy school supplies. It's all violations of the NCAA. You can't give them a ride to school if they're not in class. So my father came out publicly and ripped the NCAA. He said, "This isn't fair. You're making these kids live in poverty." And at the same time, there's some big schools that generate a lot of money for the NCAA that are giving large sums of money to players, buying them. What you see now when the shoe company's giving a couple $100,000 to get kids to go to a certain school. Well, that was happening back then by boosters. And my father said, "This is wrong. You won't touch the big schools like UCLA and Kentucky, and you're going out to these small schools that don't have any money, and they're just trying to let those kids that are playing live like any other college student." So he wrote those two articles, you said, pissed the NCAA off. The executive director, Walter Byers, he thought he was J. Edgar Hoover, and he didn't like anybody questioning him. And my father fought him, and he's got that Armenian perseverance in him and never gave up, and the NCAA never gave up after him.
I love what your dad said about Cleveland State.
Yeah.
Give us that quote, because it's fantastic.
Yeah, he said the NCAA got so mad at the University of Kentucky that they put Cleveland State on 2 more years probation.
That's fantastic.
That was one of his most quoted lines in his entire career.
You, in your book, go through all of these battles that your dad fought, and they dogged him for the rest of his college coaching career. Some of them involved, of course, our own Dr. John Welty, who was at Fresno State after leaving here at IUP, and we can read about those. One of the great things that shines through in the book, though, is the absolute respect that your dad had among the college coaching community. People loved the guy. Yeah,
my dad had a really good, for lack of a better phrase, people skills. He was great with the kids that he coached, but he was also great with his colleagues, and he was great with the fans. He knew how to deal with people. In fact, now I'm getting up in my years as a person. I keep thinking that, gosh, why didn't I get that people skills that he had? My dad was so far ahead of the game. And he had great relationships with the coaches back then. And back then, those coaches just wanted to coach basketball. They weren't into all these CEO type of looks that you see now with the college coaches. There's some great coaches back there and funny coaches back there. And my father was very close with Jim Valvano, very close with Abe Lemons, who was the Oklahoma City and Texas coach. And I put in the book a bunch of stories that they told of the funny lines they had, because my dad just thought they were the funniest people ever, and he would always retell us those stories.
Yeah, they're just fantastic stories, and so well written by you. When you took up this book, did it take you down roads you hadn't visited for a while?
Yeah, first of all, it took me a long time to write it because I had a lot of emotion. I started when my father first left Fresno State, and I don't think a reader wants to read a book that's biased and emotional by somebody that's getting their points across. So I cut the book down over the years to take out things that I might have thought was important, but I don't think the reader did. I rewrote it probably 100 times. I cut off about 60,000 words. I think it's 110 now. It was about 170 before. So I think it's pretty tight and just with the things that the readers would enjoy. And I'm glad that you liked it.
The book is Rebel with a Cause, the true story of Jerry Tarkanian. It's written by his son, Danny Tarkanian. Danny, where can people learn about the book and get it?
Yeah, then go to Amazon and just put in the name Rebel with the Cause, or my name or my father's name, Danny Tarkanian or Jerry Tarkanian. It'll come up. It's in some bookstores, but not all of them. So Amazon's where that I tell people to go.
Yeah, and you're in Nevada, but you do a lot of charitable work and some different foundations that you're involved in. So your work continues, doesn't it?
Well, I started a basketball academy to work with young kids, and it isn't to teach them how to play basketball. What I think sports does for people, and I think this is really one of the downfalls of our society right now, is the de-emphasis of sports. When you play sports, you learn the life lessons that you take with you the rest of your life. You learn how to compete. You learn how to handle adversity. You learn how to win with the class, lose with dignity, as my father would say. You learn how to work with the supervisor, work with your teammates. Everything that you need to do, no matter what profession you're in, you learn that through playing sports. So we take a bunch of kids, many of them from the poverty level, and we work with them and give them the opportunity to learn those life skills.
Some really serious topics, but a really, really fun read. The book is Rebel with a Cause, the true story of Jerry Tarkanian. Danny Tarkanian, thanks for visiting with us today.
Well, it was my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me on.